All right, good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. Really glad to have you all in the room for these concurrent papers. I'm very excited that we have two fabulous papers in this hour. We're going to take first a paper from Dr. Jason Sexton, and we will receive questions directly after his paper. And then we will be receiving our second paper for the afternoon. So first, to introduce Jason Sexton, is a formerly incarcerated theologian and cultural historian at UCLA, where he researches faith, carcerality, and the environment. He co-leads a loose-funded project on faith and ecology, and he's the author of Redemptive Dreams, with a forthcoming book exploring the ties between eugenics, religion, and the carceral state. So please help me in welcoming Jason.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so Karl Barth's early academic teaching career. Oh, sorry. You got the title up here. Good. Barth's early academic teaching career and early ministerial life took place during what's commonly referred to as the well-known eugenic era. Within the set of dominant logics in full swing for the furtherance of state life during the first half of the 20th century in much of North America and Europe, this time period provides the contextual backdrop of not only Barth's rejection of natural theology for his theological project, but also his response to the emphases within the Third Reich's National Socialist eugenic program from 1933 and on, and in his commitments to respecting and protecting life in Church Dogmatics 3:4. Now, new research in legal scholarship has discovered the ongoing persistence of the eugenic template in US penal policy that's persisted to today as explanatory of mass incarceration. This is from Laura Appelman and Jonathan Simon at Berkeley and at Willamette Law School and Berkeley Law School, and which I've drawn significantly on in my recent article, which aimed to draw from theirs to show how it also exists in religion and theology that have buoyed these logics, as well as in the computational and biological sciences, which my next book is working on, which then, of course, runs to the second half of the 20th century to today, which Timnit Gebru and others have shown. Now, this context sheds light on the scenario where Barth, backing up in reverse, found himself targeted, arrested, and convicted as a criminal in 1934-35 Germany, as Sarah Job has convincingly presented, with additional later connective relevance to his service to prisoners and Sarah's work that she shared yesterday in her wonderful talk, especially in Basel prison and the sermons we're hearing from, especially in the later latter portion of his ministry. Now, acknowledging this, including Barth's solidarity with what I have elsewhere called Ecclesia Incarcerate, the prison church, and some seminal articles on this subject, of some concern is his methodological and theological rationale for rejecting the eugenic outlook of his era and what lessons we might draw from this. Now, without time to develop this much from Barth's sermons, mainly because I am not well versed in them, he develops this in, as we've mentioned, Church Dogmatics 3:4, section 55, the doctrine of creation, freedom for life, and his treatments respect for life and the protection of life, reflecting the mingling of these outlooks for not only rejecting, he says, what took place under the very questionable regime, to put it mildly, and its usage of, he says, scientific biology and medicine in the modern sense, but also for how the Third Reich of National Socialism, he says, adopted a program with its theories concerning the preservation and propagation of the race, supposedly underlying the nation and therefore the state. Such theories found the state so societally constituted and ordered with capacity, he says, to declare that certain sick people are unfit to live, and in turn carrying the responsibility to, quote, execute their annihilation. This included, he says, those who are incurably infirm, the insane, imbeciles, the deformed, persons who by nature or accident or war are completely immobilized and crippled and therefore, quote in his terms, useless. Now, with some reference to the utopian, this is just or we might say dystopian world portrayed in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, published in 1932, which Barth called a terrible book, with its, not because of the nature of the book, but because of its content, right? With its so-called positive eugenic outlook, where artificial procreation and embryo rearing become general law and are carried out mechanically. On the question of whether human society has the right to extinguish life of those it's deemed, quote unquote, useless, that's Barth's approach to negative eugenics, right? The answer for Barth is an unequivocal no. Barth deemed this a type of killing which can be regarded only as murder, a wicked usurpation of God's sovereign right over life and death. And he insists, quote, the value of this kind of life is God's secret. And he has little confidence in the state to declare the incurably infirm or the cripple as criminal or enemy of the state, who would otherwise had otherwise been deemed as threatening to the state's own self-preservation. And Barth asks, who can really know whether it may not be far more precious in the eyes of God or be revealed as far more glorious in eternity than the lives of hundreds of healthy workers and peasants, technicians, scientists, artists, and soldiers, which the state rates so highly. Now, in reading a few portions of that sort of Barth's critique of negative eugenics, as it were, so-called. But on so-called positive eugenics, he goes on, after his brief engagement with Huxley, to note the capacity of each individual is in reality as incalculable and uncontrollable as he is himself. It can be known and decided only by God. If a man says, I cannot, he must remember that he might well be able to do today what he quite honestly thought he could not do yesterday. But if he says, I can, must consider that he might not be able to do today or ever again what he was confident he could do yesterday. He goes on to refer to something as to this as the genuine art of living that is learned along the way of such human decisions in relation to God, of such discovery of the limits within which a man may be powerful and beyond which he can only condemn himself to powerlessness, seeing that God has prescribed and set them for him. That is the notion of limits. God knows the limitations of each individual. He set for them as he has lent and continually lends him this life and not another. And as he instructs him concerning, I feel like all this him, since the patriarchal, sick, apologies. But is lent and continually lends him this life and not another, and as he instructs him concerning himself, the man who is obedient to God must consider, therefore, that while his capacities may be immeasurable to himself, it's hard not to think of Elon Musk and a lot of other tech bros, measured to himself, they're certainly not without limitations. He goes on further to say that we can see on this large, and this is in the smaller print, large scale, though it's equally valid on a small if we consider the obvious problem of modern technology. Like a miracle, there began to dawn on Western man, and right, he's talking about sort of positive eugenics here, progress. This dawning of man is now beginning to do so on almost the whole of mankind. The human capacity or ability to harness and control the materials and forces of nature in all their variety, and like a storm, there has come in a corresponding and comprehensive will for this power, followed by achievement in every sphere, and opening up the most fantastic prospects of further achievement in the future. He goes on to say, though, and question whether all this capacity and will are vitally necessary. Naturally, he says, the abundance of technical possibilities which modern life enjoys as compared with that of our fathers and forefathers has brought with it a corresponding abundance of requirements which were likewise unknown to them, right? So this is modernity and the comforts that we've experienced. But how many, he says, of our modern requirements are really necessary, justified, sensible, or even genuinely felt? And I think about Hartmut Rosa's critique in his work on resonance theory, and of course Barth's really ongoing critique of modernity here. He goes on to say, to give only a single sentence, are all the traffic accelerations offered us today really indispensable? And acceleration is Rosa's main problem. He says they save time, it's argued, Surely sensible people in the past had sufficient time for genuinely necessary things, with much less speedy traffic. And coming from Los Angeles, I could do with less traffic altogether. But he goes on to say, and foolish people today, in spite of our speedy transport, still have too little time for what is genuinely necessary. Now, on so-called negative eugenics, again, he notes that human life is fully accepted in Jesus Christ and the incarnation of his word. Therefore, he says, respect is due to it. And with respect, protection against each and every callous negation and destruction, since its protection has its inner norm in the will of God, the Creator. And so Barth's focus is the protection of life here, when, of course, his life had also just less than 2 decades prior to this, fallen under the gaze of the state, right? Removed from a teaching post, left unemployed, punished with wage reduction and a new and additional mode of reasoning, I think, and I'm going to introduce this to you, this new and additional mode of reasoning became operative, that simultaneously exists within and among those who have been subjected to the criminal legal carceral apparatus. You might call this survival mode, perhaps. But to varying degrees, I think it's somewhat akin to, though distinct from, what Tunde Adeleke calls a guerrilla intellectualism. And of course, in that case, with the Black nationalist struggle for liberation from centuries of colonial oppression, although that might be maybe perhaps closer to what we find in Bonhoeffer. But Barth, I think, displays a kind of, within this carceral intelligence, with its inherent woundedness, versatility, resilience, social engagement, connectivity, and collaboration that's operative within the Western and European struggle at the time for cohesion that reflects the imaginative capacity to successfully negotiate harmful, life-denying systemic structures of death and oppression within that otherwise civilized space. Now, within this space and time, and I'm thinking about the talk earlier this morning from Dr. Adkins, time, there's something, I think, that happens when one becomes acutely aware of one's having become subject to the carceral apparatus. Something happens, including increased surveillance there and apprehension through arrest and processing with various consequential and outcomes, through careful posturing, legal negotiations and bargains, various forms of sentencing, etc. And I think taking a step further, not merely in legal processes, but also in time, right? Legal processes being cultural constructs, but time, therein, we find, I think, something else that happens when sentencing has occurred, where one becomes aware of a trajectory into a new unknown. That is, you're not getting out for a while. Regardless of whatever appeals or community resources one may have had, those are now not accessible in the same erstwhile manner, once upon a time. This is now one's new reality with new rules and new players, where the imprisoned person now then has decisions to make and new communities to forge bonds with, and a totally new dynamic in this newly experienced social order of the underworld, as David Scarbeck calls it. This is precisely what I mean then in referring to carceral intelligence as a quickened mode of reasoning that befits the context of life on the inside. It then becomes a demonstrable means of resistance to death, whether social or real, with the former a surety, social death, and the latter unknown, which a lot of immigrants are experiencing in this country at present, with over 3,000 a month, with the targets set on them by our current demonic regime of death. But within this mode of reasoning, carceral intelligence is a relational mode of reasoning that renounces what Czesław Miłosz refers to as loyalty to one's country, with the requisite need to eradicate patriotic feelings inculcated in school and in the university as the price to pay in order to get beyond one's current predicament, moving down the road of progress, which Miłosz says is a price that not everyone's willing to pay. Within this, I think there is also a kind of spirituality that's connected to the ancient practice of the care of the self, where spirituality consists in the search, practice from Foucault, and experience through which the subject carries out the necessary transformations on himself in order to have access to the truth, which includes, Foucault says, the set of researches, practices, and experiences which may be purifications, ascetic exercises, renunciations, conversions of looking, modifications of existence, etc., which are not for knowledge, but for the subject's very being. Again, a mode of reason, a mode of being, for his very being, the price to be paid for access to the truth. This is what leads my dear friend and colleague, political scientist at Brown, David Scarbeck, to make his claim that incarcerated people are highly sophisticated, contrary to common superficial narratives, and what he calls rational, which leads David to then develop his own economic understanding of rational choice theory to tell the story of how prison gangs emerged in California in the 1950s with the emergence of the Mexican mafia, simply arising for protection against oppressors, with quite a violent emergence on the scene in order to survive. And from a Christian perspective, this is seen, as I've already mentioned, in what I've called ecclesia incarcerate, in the capacity of life even under and often very distinct from the work of chaplains. And against other forces in carceral spaces, both formal and informal, it works dynamically on the inside to organize, to mobilize forms of resistance and transformative intelligence, both internally and externally, for overall engagement. And is carried on with ecclesia incarcerate on the inside that's remaining connected and organized and has often been manifest in virtually every fiber, I think, in this conference in various ways over the last 2 days. But as such, it's conducive to social engagement while remaining underground, often misunderstood by other structures and actors, and especially by state actors with their predominant violence motif, which we really must stop perpetuating. That's not all that happens there all the time. But it's a dynamic that I think displays simultaneously a social recognition and social resignation, with a wider sphere of logic seen to find a place to be and to live. Amid the intensity, I think, of displaced and the experience of having been a body seized, removed, and subjected to unjust modes of punishment that fail to correspond to any meaningful forms of justice, this mode of intelligence seeks a better geography. Ruthie Gilmore reminds us, of course, that freedom is a place. And carceral intelligence has an eye on this place, an eye on the truth and what sets people free. That's another passage, by the way, Sarah, to Jeremiah 29:11, John 8:32, and of course Romans 8:28, which we would cite regularly. But this is, of course, an intelligence also that knows how to come back through failure. Nodding to Durkheim, although it's difficult to distinguish whether this is personal, social, or societal failure. The latter, societal failure, seems obvious. The former, personal failure, that's, I suppose, what the Oxford English Dictionary would say when it defines crime as the first definition as sin. Personal failure invites us, I think, with this notion of failure to reflect on a doctrine of sin and forgiveness, I think, which, according to Douglas, is not a matter for Paul so much, but is one for Barth and the current US legal system via suffering and the reinvention of the self. And this happens, of course, simultaneously amid the ongoing subjectivity, whether real or perceived, of a strong adherence to life, and sets out to interpret, as a form of critique, the world. That is, the things around the self, and to critique also the meaning of history and how prisons fit and what they do when humans are subject to them, and how we can work within them and around them and perhaps on them. And as such, this also resists subjectivity in any course of recognition of being state property, or concepts of inmate, or my number was 72451, assigned to me that is not my identity. One of a statistic or evidence of the need of social angst. And I think for all of this and what I'm trying to develop in relationship to the modern prison and being subject to its material power in relationship to nature and time. And I wonder if we can get that next slide, or really the only slide I have. I draw upon notions of intelligence or intelligences from cognitive and computational scientists. I do teach in a sociology department, so it's sort of part of the game. And their capacities, I'm drawing from them, for recognizing, for shaping and acting, and for programming or storytelling. And in his 1999 book, The Clock of the Long Now, drawing from theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson, Stuart Brand develops his own theoretical schema that he calls pace layering, where interactions among faster and slower segments of civilization shape our understanding of change over time. And Brand looks at these 6 layers, with each being bound to its own durational schema, giving systems of approach to the endurance of civilizations, wherein a robust, resilient civilization is able to absorb shocks in its system through a process of both fast-moving and slow-moving pace layers. And he looks at these from fashion to commerce to infrastructure, governance, culture, and nature, to which I think in this complex system, right, and each being mostly formed by the one closest to it. In the complex system, they all shape each other, but mostly being formed to the closest one next to it. But I think in our analysis of the prison, I think if we can get the next slide, we might tend to think of carceral intelligence operating in various layers here. And of course, taking Barth as a justice-involved theologian, as well as those serving short-term sentences, is what often are happening through various laws, often quite arbitrary, and of course all laws are relative products of culture. But then of course what we have in the structures that we've built, new kinds of prisons, those emerging right now. We've shut a lot of juvenile ones down, but James Foreman showed us in the New York Times article 2 months ago that new ones are being created by various states. And some of this lends toward more or less toward different geographical features. We talk about California's Central Valley as being prison alley, places where, right, developers often say there's nothing there. Well, there's a lot of things there, but of course that is related to how in modernity people are thought of, and place and material are thought of, which relates to governance happening, right, both in a larger and macro and micro scale, which relates, of course, to the modern prison as our solution for all. Foucault reminds us societal angst, but it is something made by humans that we built. We didn't have to, but we did, and made by humans and our deepest values, which I think, especially in this country, reflects our value of punishment. It's perhaps our core value. But what about the relationship of all this to nature? And I think carceral intelligence, with this need for, as Simone Weil talks about, our need for roots, and back to the earth, back to what's most real. I think this does begin to demonstrate, and I do have more to talk about, and I am planning to have done by the end of, without so much theological input into the theory that I'm trying to develop of carceral intelligence, an article hopefully by the end of July, if anybody's interested in reading. I'd love more feedback then. But I think this is then carceral intelligence, a kind of emotional intelligence that works at each level, but especially and increasingly toward a radical move, which Barth has within it, with Barth, the affirmation of life in particular places. Thank you.
Thank you. You all help me thank Dr. Sexton for his fabulous paper. And then we are simultaneously going to welcome up our second and last paper. The Reverend Claude Atcho is the vicar of Church of the Resurrection in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I also learned today and got to hear about his ministry at the jail in Charlottesville, which is a 3-county jail. He's a doctoral student in New Testament at Trinity College, Bristol, and he's also the author of Reading Black Books: How African American Literature Can Make Our Faith More Whole and Just. So y'all help me welcome Reverend Atcho.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to have some time to share together. Midway upon my interpretive journey in Pauline studies, I found myself in a dark wood, lost among an expansive exegetical terrain, overpopulated with disembodied readings. The straightforward path had been lost, but Karl Barth makes for a great trailblazing Virgil. Dante for you. Next slide. Because Barth takes seriously God's fleshly movement into the far country of this world, he offers a path for better engagement with Paul's imprisonment in Philippians and a clearer understanding of the gospel's embodied word for the imprisoned. This is an image of why we should not use Chat GPT. It's what I asked for. Yeah, that's what I asked for, and that's what they gave me. The powers of sin and death, friends. In this way, Barth's 1926 lectures on Philippians serve as a valuable asset for an African-American reading of this letter in an age of mass incarceration. As Ryan Schellenberg has argued convincingly, Philippians is a crucial carceral text. And what sets Philippians apart from other Pauline prison epistles is not so much its emphasis on joy, which is repeated throughout the letter, but actually its emphasis on embodiment. And in this paper, I want to explore how a somatic reading or a body hermeneutic reading of Philippians, specifically Philippians chapter 1, how a somatic reading of Philippians 1, guided by Barth's emphasis on divine solidarity, foregrounds rather than abstracts the embodied and apocalyptic dimensions of Paul's gospel. That embodied and apocalyptic dimension is namely this: the transformation of subjugated bodies into honored sites of divine action and solidarity. So here's how we'll proceed. Philippians features two important pericope or pericopes, somatic hotspots, if you will, in which Paul reflects on his imprisoned body. So I want to briefly highlight these key texts to first demonstrate the problem of disembodied readings, after which I want to turn to briefly the connection between embodiment and cosmology. Then I want to follow that up with a really brief constructive somatic reading of Philippians 1, along with the word that such a reading might offer in the context of American mass incarceration. So we'll start with the problematic. We'll go to the next slide and leave AI-generated Virgil Barth behind. Starting with the problematic disembodied readings. First, let's listen to the two key somatic texts from Philippians. Philippians 1, Paul writes this: I know that through your prayers and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. Here he's reflecting on his plight and circumstance to his friends, the church at Philippi. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored or magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. In Philippians 3, Paul writes again of his body, united spiritually and corporately with the Philippians. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will change our humiliated body or our lowly body to be like his glorious body, by the power which enables him even to subject all things to himself. These somatic texts are often interpreted abstractly with minimal regard for the author's carceral context. Such disembodied readings obscure the embodied dimension of Paul's gospel and the way in which Paul finds in the gospel hope in his imprisonment. We'll explore the Philippians 1 text a little bit more shortly, but just note this here, that Paul's hope in his imprisonment is that Christ will be honored or magnified in my body. The problem is disembodied readings. One well-known commentary translates this as, in my body, translate this as, with full courage, now as always, Christ will be praised because of me. So Paul's explicit body language is interpreted as indicative of Paul's entire personality. The interpreters abstract and obscure Paul's body as the site of Christ's magnification. Feminist readings are usually commendably attentive to embodiment. And yet, even such readings can miss the somatic plot when it comes to Philippians. One commentator suggests that in my body, verse 20 of chapter 1, is an expression that refers to Paul's whole being, so that it can mean in, quote, my whole being in everything I say and do, end quote. Now, while this whole body perspective is accurate, it doesn't fully emphasize what Paul in his language makes explicit: his body, which readers, his friends, know is in chains. Likewise, Paul's body talk in Philippians 3 suffers from a disembodied hermeneutic. And on Philippians 3:19, one commentator writes this. This is where Paul talks about our lowly body. This is what the commentator says. Ours is a lowly body because it belongs to the state of humiliation caused through sin. End quote. Here, the lowly body is a tragic casualty of theological abstraction. The interpreter leaps over the specificity of Paul's humiliated body in prison in order to comment generally on the body of humanity in systematic categories. Theology then consumes social location. So to break out of this forest of Pauline abstraction, Barth proves a capable guide toward an embodied African American reading of Philippians. For the remainder of this paper, I wish to explore how this somatic reading of Philippians 1 can again foreground rather than abstract the embodied and apocalyptic dimensions of Paul's gospel in its ability to transform subjugated bodies into honored sites of divine action and solidarity. The somatic lens that I propose seeks to take embodiment seriously by sustained attention to the carceral experience of Paul in Philippians, such that when Paul engages in body talk, his carceral location is integral, not incidental to his meaning. This emphasis on embodiment is of deep concern to African American experience, highlighted especially by the scholarship of Elisa Bowens in her work, African American Readings of Paul. African Americans have faced chattel slavery, often sourced by distorted readings of Paul. In the wake of slavery, African Americans have suffered Jim Crow segregation and lynching. And in the present, we face what, as you all know, Michelle Alexander has called the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration. These various forms of injustice are not abstract, but embodied. And indeed, they are a significant instantiation of a particular cosmological reality. Since at least 1619, on American colonial soil, the Black body has been seen as chattel, property to be enslaved with divine sanction for such treatment. As evidenced in practices as varied as miscegenation to lynching, the Black-white divide in particular has been in the American psyche understood as a divine creation that can't be violated. This has been dubbed by some religious scholars as a form of ontocracy. One scholar defines this ontocracy as a, quote, situation in which the pattern of society is identified with the immemorial order of the cosmos. Next slide, please. In light of all of this, the theologian Kelly Brown Douglas makes a powerful assertion. Douglas asserts that within an American frame, in light of ontocracy, bodies, and evaluation, Douglas asserts that in an American frame, a free Black body literally points to the possibility of a different cosmic order. Why? Douglas says that, in effect, because the ideology of white supremacy is maintained to the degree that non-white bodies are subjugated to white bodies. Therefore, a free Black body points to the possibility of a different cosmic order. The underlying logic of Douglas' statement is that white supremacy and injustice operate by a hierarchical categorization of human bodies. The treatment and valuation of human bodies, both reflexively and communally, testify to the condition of the world. What might all of this mean for a body hermeneutic reading of Philippians? Well, one, it means attending to Paul's body talk seriously and theologically. It also means how Paul views his imprisoned body within the harsh conditions of carceral subjugation actually reveals something about the contours, the embodied contours of his gospel. And it reveals something of the cosmological landscape in which Paul locates himself through Jesus. Okay, now a quick constructive turn to Philippians 1. Turning to Philippians 1, we return to the phrase overlooked by many interpreters, but a crucial linchpin from a body hermeneutic perspective. In my body, verses 19 and 20. These verses offer significant insight into Paul's view of the gospel's impact upon his carceral experience. Here we find that Paul's hope is that Christ will be magnified in his body, thus identifying his body as a site of divine action and thus a locus of theological significance. Such belief runs contrary to the logic and the story of the world. To the human eye, Paul is simply another human body, a Jewish body, under Roman confinement. That an imprisoned body in abject conditions can be a place of divine magnification testifies, therefore, to the hidden presence of a world beyond this world and a power stronger than the carceral state. This gestures towards a different cosmic order, one in which, to quote Paul, life or death can be the means of divine magnification, even if Rome believes itself to be in control. What in the logic of Philippians enables Paul to read his circumstance, his body, his plight in this way? Well, we turn here finally to our Philippian Virgil, Karl Barth. In his Philippians commentary, Barth emphasizes in this section on Philippians 1, 19 and 20, Barth emphasizes the divine passive in the verb to magnify or to be honored. When Paul says, Christ will be honored in my body. Paul emphasizes the passivity of the verb, and he notes that Paul, quote, sees himself entirely as object, end quote. Again, this is precisely how the Roman system would view Paul, as an object subjugated to Rome's carceral and juridical powers. Yet Paul views himself as an object of a greater subject with whom there is divine action and solidarity. Paul views his bodily circumstance through this lens of divine action and in particular divine solidarity. And this is where Barth comes in through his Philippians commentary based on his lectures in the late 1920s. Barth highlights Paul's status as, quote, a slave of Jesus Christ, Philippians 1:1. Paul is thus a slave of the God who in the incarnation, to quote Philippians 2, emptied himself by taking the form of a slave. This is the same God who then was subjected to the carceral system and died in what Barth calls in Philippians 2, quote, the criminal's death. Paul does not view himself, therefore, according to the flesh or according to the world, but rather trusts in the hope of this God, such that the story of this God's incarnate body, in the Christ hymn of Philippians 2, reshapes the hope of the apostles' own flesh. Just as Christ's body experienced the humiliation of becoming a slave, Philippians 2:7, Paul faces the humiliation of imprisonment. And yet the story of Christ's body did not end in humiliation, but in glorification. Paul believes the story of his body will conclude similarly. This is what he articulates in Philippians 3. Thus, for Paul, his bodily situation is an important canvas upon which Christ's solidarity and victory will be revealed, with an embodied hope in the present, as reflected in Philippians 1, and an embodied transformation in the parousia as depicted in Philippians 3. We should note that Paul had other resources available to him with which he could have coped with his imprisonment and likely impending trial. One might maybe imagine Paul dealing with his imprisonment by reflecting on the freedom of his spirit despite the imprisonment of his body. This would be a standard Stoic move. For many Hellenized ancients, this dissociative paradigm would be useful to maintain a sense of freedom in bondage. For instance, following Socrates, Epictetus encapsulates in the dialogue the sort of Stoic disassociation between the true self and the body. In the dialogue, one conversation partner says, I will throw you into prison. This is from his discourses. And the response is correction. It is my body you will throw in there. Ancient prisoners would have ample justification to ascribe to this disassociative paradigm. First, it would be lockstep with the Stoic cultural notions. And secondly, such a belief could be useful as a sort of cognitive shield to help oneself deal with the challenge of carceral experience. Forms of this dissociative paradigm persist in contemporary carceral settings and undoubtedly prove themselves to be a useful aid to those prisoners for whom such high calls of inner strength are indeed attainable. In fact, inmates from an Ohio State penitentiary, following the works and paradigm of Stoicism, offer the following encouragement to peers. Quote, "You can make your life a palace or a prison just by how you think." It's actually a really interesting book by Jeff Traylor called the Epictetus Club, and it kind of follows the story of the teaching of Stoicism within this penitentiary. And my point here is not to critique Stoic paradigms in carceral settings, but rather my point is to demonstrate one operative framework for hope in carceral suffering, generally contemporaneous to Paul's time and to today, and to show that as an operative framework in order for us to see that for Paul, the incarcerated apostle, his hope is distinctly embodied. He doesn't make the move to distinguish between the freedom of his spirit and the bondage of his body, but rather uses the language of Christ magnified in my body. Paul does not endure by disassociation from the self and bodily realities. And it's important to note that inner strength, which I think would be required, virtue, tranquility, self-discipline, to inhabit this dissociative paradigm. This sort of inner strength does not testify to a different cosmic order, but rather human potentiality rooted within this world. In contrast, Paul endures by apprehending and trusting faith that his bodily circumstances, through potentiality and solidarity, are both connected to and controlled by the risen Jesus. With regard to this embodied potentiality, Paul views his carceral experience and his whole embodied being as containing the capacity to be a site of divine activity greater than the impending trial and potential death to which he may be subjected. With regard to divine solidarity, Paul views his bodily experiences as controlled by and in union with the humiliation, exaltation trajectory of God's own incarnate flesh. Whereas for Stoics, their internal realities serve to shield their true selves from external circumstances, for Paul, there is an embodied reality that subsumes his own. This leads not to disassociation, but to solidarity, to union, and ultimately, in Paul's language, deliverance, which for Paul is always embodied. Hence, the parameters of this deliverance, this magnification, are whether by life or by death, in verse 20. For Paul, there is no body-free deliverance, for the hope of the gospel of Jesus touches concrete persons and circumstances. It's thus that my contention that this sort of somatic reading of Philippians reveals something of the nature of Paul's apocalyptic gospel and its hope for the imprisoned. Ernst Käsemann famously claimed that anthropology is cosmology concretized. And in a way, this sort of resonates with Douglas's quote that a free black body literally points to the possibility of a different cosmic order. A free black body speaks of a new world not constrained by the logics of white supremacy. Just as the body of an imprisoned apostle, as a site of divine magnification, speaks of a world where God's suffering and resurrection impinges upon the persons and bodies trapped in carceral settings and systems, whether Roman or American. This embodied hope of Paul highlights the apocalyptic flavor of Paul's gospel and its word to the imprisoned and to many who are held in bondage through worldly valuations of bodies that conflate black bodies in particular with criminality. I'll close in this fashion. What is it that enables the ascended Christ to be magnified in an incarcerated body in the bowels of the earth? Would argue that this is a phenomenon that does not belong to this world, but the inbreaking of a new age. This happens, I think, for Paul in verse 19 through two instrumental means, through the Spirit and through the prayers of the Philippians. Paul has this understanding that through a mystical union with the Spirit of Jesus Christ, he is brought into solidarity with Jesus, and his body is placed on the humiliation resurrection trajectory of the flesh of God's very self. A last word on implications. How might this sort of reading that I'm gesturing toward, how might this reading move persons not only to think about Philippians differently, but to embody fresh action? What does this reading of Paul potentially offer to us in an age of the prison industrial complex, whereas Michelle Alexander writes, today's lynching is incarceration? We turn again to Barth. Barth observes that Paul begins his letter with himself and Timothy as authors. This is noteworthy. Barth comments that a hero or a genius stands alone, but an apostle has others standing with them. And it's this same communal solidarity that's prominent in Philippians 1:19, where the incarcerated apostle writes that it's through the prayers of the Philippians and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus that his plight will turn out for his salvation or his deliverance. Where Stoics might summon inner strength to endure, it's the hope of divine solidarity of which Paul speaks that's appropriated mystically by the Spirit and then communally through the church. The implications for the church are thus profound. The solidarity of the incarcerated God is realized in part through the people of that same God in prayer and proximity to those behind bars. A people who respond in this manner to those on the inside thus testify to a different valuation of persons and bodies, one rooted in the dignity and liberation of all God's creatures through Jesus, seeking to live into that future world even now. Thank you.